Welcome to Spicy Family Scandals, where real-life drama meets hard-earned wisdom. Today's story is about betrayal, resilience, and the power of standing up for yourself. Let's dive in.
It wasn't the first time someone tried to humiliate me, but it was the first time it happened in front of 200 people, and on one of the most important days of my cousin's life. I'll never forget the look on Jake's face when Emma, his stunning new bride, raised her champagne glass and publicly reduced me to nothing more than the help. She smiled so sweetly, dripping with fake charm, while her words carved into me like shards of glass. It was as if she'd been planning it for weeks, no months, and maybe she had. By the time Jake grabbed the mic, the damage was already done. I could feel the heat of every eye in the room burning into me. Some were wide with shock, others glinted with poorly concealed amusement. I'd seen that expression before. The glee of people watching someone fall apart in real time. I was frozen, trapped in my chair, my face burning as if I'd just been slapped. But let me back up. None of this would make sense without context. And trust me, the context is a web of lies, secrets, and betrayals that I never saw coming. A year ago, I wouldn't have been sitting there, taking that humiliation silently. Back then, I was a completely different person. I had a successful career in marketing, a seemingly happy marriage, and a modest but comfortable life in the suburbs. Jake and I weren't close, not like when we were kids, but we still stayed in touch. When he called to introduce me to his fiancée, I was genuinely happy for him. Emma seemed perfect for him. Poised, gorgeous, intelligent. What I didn't know at the time was that Jake's wedding would mark the beginning of the most humiliating chapter of my life. Not because of Emma's cruel toast, but because everything I thought I knew about my family, my career, and even myself was about to implode. The cracks started to show 6 months before the wedding. I came home one night to find my husband, Eric, sitting in the dark with a suitcase by his feet. He didn't offer an explanation, just mumbled something about needing space and walked out. At first, I thought it was another fight, the kind we'd had before and always patched up. But when days turned into weeks and my calls went unanswered, the truth began to set in. He wasn't coming back. That's when the dominoes started to fall. Without Eric's income, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage. I had to sell the house and move into a dingy one-bedroom apartment downtown. My savings dried up faster than I expected, and I ended up taking a series of odd jobs just to stay afloat. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd bounce back. But deep down I was ashamed. I didn't tell anyone in my family how bad things had gotten, not even Jake. So when he called out of the blue one afternoon and asked me to help with his wedding planning, I jumped at the chance. I convinced myself it was a lifeline, a way to reconnect with him and feel useful again. I didn't realize it was the start of a cruel game I didn't even know I was playing. At first, Emma was all smiles and gratitude. She'd gush about how much she appreciated my help every time I dropped off custom-made centerpieces or coordinated with the caterer. I told myself she was just stressed, that her occasional sharp tone wasn't personal. But looking back, the signs were all there. The way she'd talk over me in meetings, how she'd laugh a little too hard when I stumbled over my words, and the condescending "thank you, sweetie" she'd throw my way after every task. By the time the wedding day arrived, I was exhausted, broke, and hanging on by a thread. I told myself it was worth it though, because Jake was family. He'd always been there for me when we were kids, and I owed him that much. But then came Emma's toast. She stood there in her glittering gown, looking every bit the princess she wanted to be, and dismantled me in front of everyone. "Samantha," she said, her voice saccharine and dripping with insincerity, "has been such a blessing. She's taken care of so many little details for us. Really, she's been like a personal assistant. Or maybe even a maid." She laughed, as if she'd just made the world's funniest joke. The room went silent. Jake's college friends, who'd spent the reception barely acknowledging my existence, suddenly turned to stare at me. I caught a glimpse of my aunt shaking her head, and I felt my chest tighten. Was she disappointed in me or in Emma? I couldn't tell. Before I could process what was happening, Emma leaned in closer to the mic and delivered the final blow. "It's such a shame you didn't wear your uniform tonight, Samantha. You would have fit right in with the staff." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to leave me feeling like the floor had just opened beneath me. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the chair and vanish. But then Jake stood up, and for a split second I thought he was going to defend me. Instead, he did something no one saw coming. Jake stood up so suddenly that the laughter around the room died instantly. His face was a mask, calm, unreadable, almost detached. He walked over to Emma with measured steps, taking the mic from her hands with a gentleness that felt eerily out of place given the tension crackling in the air. "Thanks, Emma," he said evenly, his voice carrying through the room. "That was enlightening." She gave him a bewildered smile, clearly not understanding what was happening. Neither did I. Jake turned toward the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the sea of expectant faces. I've got something to say too, he continued, his tone still maddeningly calm. But before I start, let me just address one thing. He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw an apology flicker in his eyes. This woman, he said, gesturing toward me, is not a maid, a servant, or anything close to what Emma just implied. She's my cousin. And she's the reason any of you are sitting here right now, enjoying this incredible wedding. Samantha coordinated most of this herself, often at her own expense. He turned back to the crowd, his voice sharpening. So if anyone here thinks Emma's little speech was funny, let me be very clear. It wasn't. The silence that followed was suffocating. Emma's smile had vanished, replaced by a nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth. She reached for Jake's arm, but he subtly shifted away from her touch. Jake, she began, her voice tight with forced laughter. I was just joking. Everyone knows that. Do they? Jake shot back, his voice rising slightly. Because it didn't sound like a joke to me. He turned back to the crowd, gripping the mic tightly. I know what you're all thinking. Why is the groom making a scene on his wedding day? He let out a bitter laugh. But let me ask you something. What kind of person uses their wedding toast as an opportunity to humiliate someone else? What kind of person turns a celebration of love into a power play? I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't how I expected him to react. Frankly, I wasn't even sure what I expected. Part of me wanted to get up and leave, to escape the growing tension in the room, but another part of me was rooted to my chair, transfixed. Emma, meanwhile, was losing her composure. Jake, this isn't the time for this, she hissed, her voice low but audible enough for those closest to the head table to hear. Can we talk about this later? No, Jake replied sharply, turning to face her fully. We're going to talk about it now. Because I've spent the last 6 months ignoring every red flag, convincing myself that you were stressed or that I was overthinking things. But tonight you made it impossible to ignore. You've shown everyone here exactly who you are. Emma's face flushed bright red, her carefully applied makeup no longer hiding the fury simmering beneath. You're blowing this way out of proportion, she snapped. I've been nothing but kind to Samantha. Jake's bitter laugh echoed through the room. Kind? Is that what you call it? I've seen how you treat her. The little digs, the condescending tone, the way you talk about her when you think I'm not listening. And tonight, you decided to make her the butt of your cruel joke in front of everyone. That's not kindness, Emma. That's cruelty. By now the room was buzzing with murmurs. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, clearly unsure whether to intervene or let the drama play out. I don't know what you want me to say, Emma spat, her voice rising. This is ridiculous, Jake. You're ruining our wedding. Jake paused, letting her words hang in the air. Then in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper he said, No, Emma. You already ruined it. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked as though she'd been slapped, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to scream but couldn't find the words. Jake turned back to the crowd, his expression resolute. I'd like to apologize to everyone here, he said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. This was supposed to be a celebration of love and family, but clearly that's not what this has turned into. I think it's best if we end things here. There were audible gasps from the guests. My own breath caught in my throat. Did he mean the reception? Or the marriage itself? Jake, stop this, Emma said, her voice trembling now. She reached for his hand but he stepped back out of her reach. I'm done, he said simply, his eyes locked on hers. With all of it. And just like that, he handed the microphone to the nearest groomsman and walked out of the room, leaving Emma standing there, frozen in place as 200 stunned faces turned toward her. But the chaos wasn't over yet. The moment Jake walked out of the reception hall, the room exploded into chaos. Guests began murmuring in frantic whispers, some even standing to follow him, unsure if they should leave or stay. Emma, still standing at the head table, looked utterly shell-shocked. Her hands trembled as she grabbed the mic again, but no words came out. Her perfect fairy-tale wedding had just gone up in flames in front of everyone, and for the first time all evening, I saw cracks in her carefully composed mask. But I wasn't about to stick around to watch her crumble. I stood up, my legs shaking, and grabbed my clutch from the table. My instinct was to get out of there, out of the room, out of the humiliation, out of the swirling storm of emotions I didn't even know how to process yet. I made my way toward the exit, keeping my head down, but before I could slip away, someone grabbed my arm. Wait. I turned to see my Aunt Linda, Jake's mother, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. part concern, part guilt, and part something else entirely. "Samantha," she said in a hushed tone, "don't go. Please. We need to talk." I froze. Aunt Linda and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was fiercely protective of Jake, and while she'd always been polite to me, I'd never felt the warmth from her that I'd seen her give others. But now her eyes were pleading. "I can't do this right now," I said, my voice barely audible. I tried to pull my arm free, but she tightened her grip, not hard but firm enough to keep me there. "Samantha," she said again, her tone softer now, "you deserve to know the truth. About Emma. About all of this." I blinked confused. "What truth?" She glanced around the room, then lowered her voice even more. "Not here. Come with me." Against my better judgment, I followed her out of the reception hall and down a quiet hallway. She stopped in front of a small side room, opened the door and gestured for me to go inside. The room was empty except for a couple of chairs and a coat rack. My pulse was racing as I stepped inside, Aunt Linda closing the door behind us. "I should have said something sooner," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "but I didn't think it would come to this. And now it's too late to pretend everything's fine." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "What's going on, Aunt Linda?" She took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. "Emma isn't who she pretends to be." I stared at her, stunned. What does that even mean? "She's been lying to Jake. To all of us." Her hands wrung together nervously. "I found out 2 weeks ago, but I didn't know how to tell him without ruining everything. I thought maybe she changed, that this was just a phase or something. But tonight proved me wrong." "Lying about what?" I demanded, my patience wearing thin. Aunt Linda hesitated, then leaned in closer. "She's been manipulating him from the start. Using him. And Samantha, I think she planned tonight's toast to humiliate you on purpose." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Why would she do that?" "Because she knows you're the only one who can see through her," Aunt Linda said. "You've been too close to Jake for too long. You'd notice things the rest of us missed. She wanted to isolate you, make you feel small, so you'd stay out of her way." I staggered back, trying to process what she was saying. It felt surreal, like I was in some kind of twisted soap opera. What things have you noticed?" Aunt Linda hesitated again, clearly debating how much to tell me. Finally she said, "I overheard a phone call. Emma was talking to someone. Someone she called baby. And she wasn't talking about Jake." I felt my stomach drop. "Are you saying she's cheating on him?" Linda nodded grimly. "I don't know all the details, but it wasn't just the phone call. There's more. Financial discrepancies. Stories that don't add up. And now this. Publicly humiliating you? She's unraveling, Samantha." I sank into one of the chairs, my legs no longer able to hold me up. "Why didn't you tell Jake?" "I tried," she said, her voice cracking. "But he wouldn't hear it. He's so in love with her, so blinded by who he thinks she is, that he wouldn't listen. He told me to stop meddling. But after tonight, maybe he'll finally see the truth." My mind was spinning. If what Aunt Linda was saying was true, then everything about Emma, the perfect fiancée, the charming bride, was a carefully constructed lie. And now Jake's entire life was crashing down around him, and I was caught in the middle of it. But before I could say anything else, the door burst open and there she was. Emma. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time her polite, controlled demeanor was completely gone. Instead there was rage. Pure unfiltered rage. "What are you two talking about?" she demanded, her voice icy but laced with panic. I stood up slowly, my own anger starting to simmer beneath the surface. "Why don't you tell us, Emma?" I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Tell us who you've really been lying to." Her face twisted into a sneer, and for a moment I saw the real Emma. And I knew then and there that this confrontation was only just beginning. Emma stepped into the room, closing the door behind her with a slow, deliberate motion. The slam I half expected didn't come. Her calm, calculated demeanor had returned, masking the fury I'd seen just seconds earlier. She looked between Aunt Linda and me, her expression hard and unyielding, like a predator cornering its prey. "Well," she said, her voice sharp but eerily steady, "what lies are you spreading about me now, Linda?" I stayed silent, watching as Aunt Linda straightened her shoulders and met Emma's gaze. "Don't play games, Emma," she said, her voice firm. "We both know what you've been doing. It's time Jake knows too." Emma laughed. A cold, hollow sound. "Oh please. Jake won't believe a word of it. He loves me. You're just a bitter old woman who can't stand seeing him move on with someone better than." She cut herself off, her eyes darting toward me as if suddenly remembering I was in the room. "Someone like me. I felt the sting of her words, but I refused to flinch. I stepped forward, my voice steady. This isn't about jealousy, Emma. It's about the truth. And if you're so confident Jake won't believe us, why don't we take this conversation to him right now? Her composure cracked just slightly. A flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You're really going to take Linda's word over mine? The same woman who's spent the last year undermining me at every turn? That's rich, Samantha. She crossed her arms, her smirk returning. You're desperate. Both of you. I should have been rattled, but I wasn't. Her deflection was too transparent. Her confidence too forced. Funny, I said, tilting my head. Because you're the one who barged in here. Looks like you're the one who's desperate, Emma. Her smirk vanished. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? I challenged, my voice rising. I think I've got a pretty good idea. You're cheating on Jake. You've been lying to him, manipulating him. And now you're panicking because you know it's all about to come crashing down. The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. For a moment Emma said nothing. Her eyes flicked toward Aunt Linda, who nodded slightly as if daring her to deny it. Then Emma did something I didn't expect. She laughed again, but this time it was genuine. A deep, bitter laugh that made my stomach twist. You really think you've got it all figured out, don't you? She said, stepping closer. You think you're going to expose me, ruin my life, and ride off into the sunset as Jake's little hero. Well, let me tell you something, Samantha. You don't know the half of it. What's that supposed to mean? I demanded, my chest tightening. Emma leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. Jake isn't as innocent as you think. He's been lying to you too. To all of you. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? Oh, you'll find out soon enough, she said, straightening up. But by the time you do, it'll be too late. Enjoy playing detective, Samantha. You're not as clever as you think. Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and left the room, leaving Aunt Linda and me in stunned silence. The quiet was deafening, the tension suffocating. I turned to Aunt Linda, my mind racing with questions I couldn't articulate. What did she mean? I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Linda shook her head, her face pale. I don't know. But whatever it is, we can't let her control the narrative. We have to find Jake before she does. Without another word, we bolted out of the room, our footsteps echoing down the hallway. The reception hall was a mess of confused guests and murmured conversations, but Jake was nowhere to be seen. Where would he go? I asked, my voice tinged with panic. Linda hesitated, then said, There's a garden behind the venue. He might have gone there to clear his head. We pushed our way through the crowd and out the side doors, the crisp night air hitting me like a slap. The garden was dimly lit, but in the distance I saw him, Jake, standing alone by a fountain, his hands gripping the edge as if to steady himself. Jake! Called out, my voice breaking. He turned slowly, his face a mixture of anger, confusion, and pain. Samantha, he said, his voice rough. What's going on? I glanced at Aunt Linda, then back at Jake. We need to talk. About Emma. About everything. His jaw tightened. Not now. I can't. Jake, please, I interrupted, stepping closer. She's lying to you. She's been lying to you from the start. His eyes darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. I shouted, my frustration boiling over. If I'm so wrong, tell me what I'm missing. Because she just told me you've been lying too. So what is it, Jake? What's the truth? For a long moment he said nothing. The silence stretched so thin I thought it might shatter. And then finally he spoke. I can't do this here, he said, his voice barely audible. Come with me. Both of you. There's something you need to see. And with that, he turned and started walking toward the parking lot. Aunt Linda and I exchanged a look, equal parts fear and determination, and followed him into the night, bracing ourselves for whatever truth was waiting to be uncovered. The drive to wherever Jake was leading us was thick with tension, the kind you could almost choke on. Aunt Linda and I sat in silence in the backseat of his car, while Jake gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. I had a million questions swirling in my head, but the look on his face kept me from asking any of them. He looked like a man on the edge, teetering between anger and despair. The night outside was quiet, the streets nearly empty as we drove through town. I kept glancing at Aunt Linda, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but she seemed just as lost as I was. Jake hadn't said a word since we left the venue, and I was starting to wonder if he'd ever tell us where we were going, or why. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake pulled into the parking lot of an office building. It was sleek and modern, the kind of place where high-powered executives probably spent their days making deals over catered lunches. The sight of it only added to my confusion. What are we doing here? I asked, my voice breaking the silence. Jake turned off the engine but didn't answer right away. He sat there for a moment, staring straight ahead before finally speaking. I've been lying to everyone, he said quietly. But it's not what you think. I exchanged a glance with Aunt Linda, who looked just as baffled as I felt. What do you mean? She asked, her tone cautious. Jake let out a shaky breath and finally turned to face us. Emma. She's not just some manipulative, cruel person. She's dangerous. And I've known it for months. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? He ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. I can't explain everything right now. You have to see it for yourself. With that, he got out of the car and motioned for us to follow. We stepped into the building, the cool air of the lobby hitting me like a blast of ice. Jake led us past the reception desk, through a series of hallways, and finally into a small office. The lights flickered on, revealing a desk cluttered with papers, a laptop, and what looked like surveillance equipment. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't just any office. This was Jake's office. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling. Jake didn't answer right away. Instead, he moved to the desk and began rifling through a stack of papers. Finally, he pulled out a thick manila folder and handed it to me. Open it. I hesitated, my hands shaking as I took the folder. When I opened it, the first thing I saw was a photo of Emma. Smiling, radiant, just as I'd always seen her. But beneath it was a series of documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements, emails, and what appeared to be background checks. All of them painting a picture of a woman I didn't recognize. She's been stealing, Jake said, his voice heavy. From me. From my company. She used her position in my life to gain access to my accounts, my business deals, everything. And she didn't do it alone. I looked up at him, my mind racing. What do you mean? There's someone else, he said, his jaw tightening. She's been working with someone. I don't know who yet, but I'm close to finding out. Aunt Linda stepped forward, her face pale. Jake, why didn't you say anything before? Why go through with the wedding if you knew? Jake laughed bitterly. You think I wanted to? I tried to call it off weeks ago, but Emma. She made it clear what would happen if I did. What would happen? I pressed, my voice rising. She threatened me, he said simply. She said she'd ruin me. That she'd destroy everything I've built if I didn't follow through. And knowing what she's capable of, I believed her. I felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. The Emma I thought I knew, the poised, charming bride, was a complete fabrication. And Jake had been living with this nightmare for months, trapped in a web of lies and blackmail. But tonight, he continued, his voice firm, she crossed a line. Humiliating you, Samantha, in front of everyone? That wasn't part of the plan. That was personal. And I'm done letting her control me. Aunt Linda stepped closer to Jake, her voice soft but steady. Jake, if she's as dangerous as you say, then we need to go to the police. I've already started the process, he said, gesturing to the laptop on the desk. But I needed more evidence. Tonight might have been the final piece. I looked back down at the folder, my stomach twisting as I flipped through the pages. It was all there. Enough to destroy Emma's reputation and possibly land her in prison. But one question still nagged at me. Who's the other person? I asked. The one she's working with? Jake's expression darkened. I don't know yet. But I have a feeling we're about to find out. As if on cue, Jake's phone buzzed on the desk. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the screen. Without a word, he handed the phone to me. The message was simple, but it sent chills down my spine. You've made a mistake. Walk away or you'll regret it. It was from an unknown number. And I knew deep in my gut that this was far from over. The weight of the message hung in the air like a storm cloud, suffocating the small office. Jake snatched the phone back, his face grim as he stared at the screen. Aunt Linda and I exchanged a glance, the unspoken fear clear between us. Whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. Jake, I said, my voice low. What exactly have you gotten yourself into? He didn't answer right away, pacing the length of the room instead, his hand running through his hair in frustration. Finally, he stopped and turned to face us, his expression a mix of anger and resignation. I don't know, he admitted. Not completely. But Emma isn't just a manipulative liar. She's involved in something bigger, something dangerous. And now so are we. The words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean, we? Jake gestured to the folder I still held. You think she doesn't know you've seen that? The minute you walked into this office, you became part of it. And if she's working with someone else, they'll come for anyone who threatens to expose them. Aunt Linda stepped forward, her face pale but determined. Then we need to act quickly. If Emma knows we're onto her, we can't sit around waiting for her next move. Jake nodded, his jaw tightening. I agree. But first, we need to figure out who's behind that message. He grabbed the laptop and pulled up a program I didn't recognize, typing furiously. I watched as strings of data scrolled across the screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard. What are you doing? I asked, stepping closer. Tracing the number, he said without looking up. Whoever sent that message isn't as anonymous as they think. Minutes ticked by in tense silence, the only sound the rapid clacking of keys. Finally, Jake stopped, his eyes narrowing as he studied the screen. Got it. Who is it? Aunt Linda asked, her voice trembling. Jake turned the laptop toward us, and my heart sank when I saw the name. Eric, I whispered, my ex-husband's name barely audible as it escaped my lips. The room seemed to tilt, my mind struggling to process the revelation. It didn't make sense. Eric had walked out of my life months ago, leaving nothing but a trail of unanswered questions and shattered dreams. And now somehow he was tied to Emma's web of lies? No, I said, shaking my head. It has to be a mistake. Jake's face hardened. It's not a mistake. The number traces back to him. He's involved. Aunt Linda placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip steady. Samantha, think. Is there anything at all, that might connect Eric to Emma? I racked my brain, my thoughts racing. Eric and Emma had never met, or at least I thought they hadn't. But then a memory surfaced. A dinner party months before the wedding. Eric had come home late, his shirt slightly wrinkled, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. When I'd asked where he'd been, he'd brushed me off, saying it was a work meeting. Could it have been more than that? I don't know, I admitted, my voice shaky. But maybe. There were things he kept from me. Places he went, people he saw. I didn't think. Jake cut me off, his voice sharp. Well, now we know. And if he's working with Emma, then we need to figure out what they're planning before it's too late. But why? I asked, frustration bubbling over. Why would Eric do this? What does he have to gain? Jake's expression darkened. Money, power, revenge. Take your pick. People like Eric and Emma will do whatever it takes to get what they want, no matter who they hurt in the process. The words stung, but they rang true. Eric had always been ambitious, willing to cut corners to climb the ladder of success. And if he'd found an ally in Emma, it made sense that they'd use Jake and me as pawns in their game. Aunt Linda cleared her throat, drawing our attention. So what's the plan? We can't just sit here waiting for them to make the next move. Jake nodded, his resolve clear. We fight back. We gather every piece of evidence we have. Emails, documents, phone records, and take it to the authorities. But we have to be careful. If they suspect anything, they'll come after us. And if they already know? I asked, my voice trembling. Jake's expression softened, but his eyes remained steely. Then we'll be ready. Just as he spoke, his phone buzzed again. He picked it up, his face hardening as he read the message. Tick-tock, Jake. You're running out of time. Aunt Linda gasped, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Whoever Eric and Emma were working with, they weren't bluffing. We need to leave, Jake said, his voice firm. Now. He grabbed the folder, his laptop, and a small black case from the desk. There's a safe house I've set up. We'll be safe there while we figure out our next move. I wanted to protest, to demand answers, but the look in his eyes stopped me. This was bigger than me, bigger than all of us. And if we didn't act quickly, there might not be a way out. As we left the office and stepped into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to close in around us, every sound amplified in the stillness. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As we sped away from the office in Jake's car, the weight of everything we'd uncovered pressed down on me. Emma's lies, Eric's betrayal, the mysterious threats. It felt like we were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The safe house Jake mentioned was a modest cabin on the edge of a wooded area, secluded and quiet. As soon as we arrived, Jake wasted no time setting up his laptop and spreading the evidence across the kitchen table. Aunt Linda and I sat nearby, both of us exhausted but too tense to rest. First thing in the morning, I'm meeting with someone I trust in law enforcement, Jake said, breaking the silence. They'll know what to do with this. He gestured to the growing pile of incriminating documents. Until then, we lay low. I nodded, but a gnawing feeling lingered in my gut. Something wasn't adding up. Emma had played the role of the perfect fiancée so convincingly, and Eric's connection to her was still murky at best. Why would they go to such lengths? Was it really just about money and power? Aunt Linda leaned forward, her face drawn with worry. Jake, are you sure your friend can handle this? These people, whoever they are, they don't seem like amateurs. Jake's jaw tightened. I trust him. And I'm done letting Emma and Eric control my life. For a moment there was silence. Then, unable to hold back any longer, I spoke. Jake, what if we're missing something? What if there's more to this than we realize? He looked at me, his expression softening. What are you thinking? I hesitated, trying to piece together the fragments of suspicion in my mind. Emma's toast, I said slowly. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. She knew exactly how to humiliate me in front of everyone. What if she was trying to provoke me? What if she wanted me to react? Jake frowned, considering my words. To what end? I don't know, I admitted. But she's not stupid. She wouldn't do something like that without a reason. Aunt Linda's face darkened. You think she wanted to distract us? From what? Before I could respond, a loud crash outside shattered the quiet. All three of us froze, our eyes darting toward the window. Jake moved first, grabbing a flashlight and motioning for us to stay put. I'll check it out. No, I said, standing. We're safer together. Reluctantly, he nodded, and the three of us stepped outside into the cool night air. The woods were eerily silent, the only sound the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. Jake shone the flashlight around, its beam cutting through the darkness. Then we saw it. A shattered window on the side of the cabin, the glass glittering on the ground like a warning. Jake cursed under his breath, his grip tightening on the flashlight. Stay close. As we circled the cabin, my heart pounded in my chest. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like a target waiting to be hit. But when we reached the front porch, there was no one there. Only a single envelope taped to the door. Jake ripped it down, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 words scrawled in bold black letters. It ends tonight. Aunt Linda gasped, clutching my arm, and Jake's face darkened with determination. Enough of this, he said, his voice low and fierce. We're calling the police. But as he reached for his phone, it rang in his hand. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated for a split second before answering. Hello. A voice crackled through the line, low and distorted. You think you're safe out there? You think running will save you? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. Who is this? What do you want? The voice chuckled, cold and menacing. What I want is for you to learn your place. Walk away, Jake. Before you lose everything. The call ended abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. Jake turned to us, his face set with grim resolve. We're not running anymore. Back inside the cabin, Jake began documenting everything: photos, screenshots, recordings. By dawn, the case was airtight. We drove to the nearest police station, where Jake's contact, Detective Harris, met us. He listened carefully as we laid everything out, his expression growing darker with each revelation. This is serious, Harris said finally. We'll start an investigation immediately. But you three need protection. These people won't go down without a fight. Over the next few weeks, the investigation unraveled Emma and Eric's scheme. They had been siphoning money from Jake's business, using forged contracts and shell accounts. Their plan had been to bankrupt him quietly and disappear with the profits. But Emma's growing arrogance, and her personal vendetta against me, had exposed their operation prematurely. When the arrests finally came, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Eric, the man I had once loved, was a stranger to me now, his ambition having consumed whatever goodness he once had. Emma, too, was a cautionary tale of what happens when deceit becomes a way of life. In the aftermath, Jake and I grew closer, our bond stronger than it had been in years. Aunt Linda became the glue that held our fractured family together, her strength a beacon during the chaos. And me? I learned something invaluable through it all. People will try to define you by your mistakes, your failures, or their own insecurities. But their perception doesn't have to be your reality. The strength to rise above lies in knowing your worth, even when others try to tear you down. As I watched the sunrise from my little apartment, I realized I wasn't the same woman who had walked into that wedding, unsure of her place in the world. I was stronger, wiser, and finally free.